Hi everyone, my name is Shoshana Davis and I am the EMEA Hospitality Lead at Intel. I'm going to make this quick as Carl briefed me that I only have a minute. So over the past 10 years, Intel has worked as a technology provider, technology advisor to leading retailers and quick service restaurant brands on their digital transformation journeys. And more recently, we have ventured into the hotel space and are working with some hotel and casino brands in the US and APJ region. The main areas that we are, advising brands on are frictionless. So how can we enable guests to interact seamlessly across the property? Personalized, how can we provide personalized, customized offers to guests using real-time data? Guest experience, so all about creating immersive and memorable guest experiences. Security, so how can we ensure guest data is protected? And finally, sustainability, so social responsibility, how can we protect the environment as well as driving business efficiency? So if you'd like to start your digital transformation journey, learn more about what that even means, or just talk about technology, please feel free to reach out to me or ask Carl to connect you with me. And thank you very much. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Shoshana. And I will post Shoshana's email address in the chat later. Thank you very much indeed. So today, our third Europe session, and potentially our most contentious, is that a good word? I think so. Why your PMS may no longer be the center of your universe, and is changing it like having open heart surgery. We have some truly pan-European speakers, and the topic will be introduced and moderated by two of our HITEC Europe 21 Advisory Council, Sophie Pomoy, who will introduce, and Jutta Moore, who will moderate the session. So Sophie, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I will go first through a very brief introduction, promise you, related to the PMS evolution. So in the 60s, you had the NCR 42. I don't know if few of you remember those NCR 42. They were cash register to manage the financial transaction on guest invoices. In the 70s, the first version of informatic with IBM 36, a framework, mainframe and terminal services system. As functionality, it included availability, reservation, guest profile, financial, few ops functions, and could be connected with third-party interface, for example, punch key card, telephone, and POS. Late 80s, first PMS on personal computer, connected on a local server with on-premise local area network. There, additional functionality were developed on demand, even on site. End of 90s, evolution into the Windows graphical user interface in parallel with the World Wide Web. The internet enabled the first hotel website to be accessible by guests. More and more functionality were built around the PMS, where some of them becomes an enterprise environment for the hospitality. Last decade, the cloud starts to make the buzz in the hotel technology industry, which enabled mobile applications for guests and employees and integration with new tools connected via APIs. Nowadays, to summarize, there are two main environments. Both are on the cloud technology, but few of them still offer on-premise option. They are remotely accessible and easy to maintain. One is more about the long-standing big players. They transform their legacy products into a cloud product with all-in-one. They can offer multiple generations of products. Several of them bought missing solutions to complete their products, integrating them into the universe. They can cover multiple product modules Hoteliers don't have to take them all, but integration certification with third party are more complex and long to achieve, even if it should be easier. The second environment is built and developed with a cloud logic from day one, with open architecture and agile integration environment. These are relatively new players that enter the market with new products, offering solutions in specific application areas, concentrating in what they do well. More flexible in connectivity, but depends on the quality of API. They don't have the same connectivity with all products. It depends on both sides. Some of them offer multiple solutions, and some of them also started to offer partner solutions through marketplace, promoting the use of open APIs. Hotelier can select the best of breed with existing partners or local solution, but still have challenges if the interface doesn't exist. On a recent interesting report from Hotelier in 2020, it clearly shows that for the digital customer journey, the PMS plays roles only during the stay of the guest. For the rest, you have a multitude of systems and providers. Is the PMS still the center of your universe? The answer is probably no. The Hotelier graph shows the guest being the center of gravity, clearly confirming the industry's new way of thinking, based on accommodating a seamless guest journey at all levels, something the old PMS philosophy simply cannot accommodate. With all variety of system use prior and after the stay of guests, the importance here is the connectivity capability and simplicity of your PMS, which will allow to get secure, controlled, and up-to-date data when you need it. And that's it for the PMS history lessons today. Let me hand over to you, Jutta.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a great overview as to where we're coming from in terms of PMS. And as we discussed earlier with Carl, just before we started the official session, the PMS is one of the most contentious questions always asked, what is the best? And when we set out to actually present this journey today, the session today, we looked at what is the best way that we can actually come across and show for an independent property, for example, where to start on the journey. So what better way to do it than to speak to two specialists? And I would like to introduce Jim Cockell and Charles Cowley. Jim will introduce himself, followed by Charlie.
Yeah, so my name is Jim Cockell. I'm both a owner of a hotel, an operator of a hotel in the Cotswolds, and I also spend some of my time doing technology consulting, having a background in revenue management, pricing and IT. So I both wear the hat and I tell people which hat to wear. So it's quite a unique position to find myself in.
Thank you. And Charlie?
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm not a hotelier. I'm very much on the technology side. I started in Parler 4 or 5 years ago, I guess with the pain of, the view of the pain of connectivity is the thing we're looking to solve. And came on that initially with a product called Stay API that connected in hotel tech to hotel data. So if you're looking to connect guest engagement tools, Wi-Fi, whatever that may be, attacking that problem, and then later on and recently booking API. But I guess in terms of like translating and just comparing it to other industries, you have APIs, and this is where it kind of comes into where the hotel and the travel industry is at the moment. You have APIs, products like Stripe that allows you to take payments incredibly easily, and that's what we're looking to within hospitality. So yeah, not a hotelier, but definitely taking the view of from the tech side in this panel.
Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. So we've put together a number of questions, and obviously if the audience have any questions, please put them into the chat, because I'm sure there will be plenty as we go along. So I'll start off with you, Jim. You have recently been through the selection and implementation process for a new PMS, not only for a client hotel group, but also for your own hotel, which is an independent. Those are two very, very different scenarios. So what advice would you give to anyone who's currently starting to review their tech stack, and in particular their PMS? Is there any key advice that you say this is the starting point?
Yeah, so although they're quite different in size, the process is quite similar. So as an independent hotelier, I sat down and looked at the pain points predominantly, and just looked through what I currently had as an incumbent PMS, and where after multiple years of using it, I found the largest pain points. And for me, they were ability for kind of multiple pricing levels, revenue management skill and capability. Payments was a big issue for me, and generally just the kind of reporting that PMS gave me. And actually for my clients, they had focused much more and on what the long-term kind of journey for the customer would be like. And that was a really important part of the selection process, because they were absolutely clear what it was they wanted the customer to do 3 to 5 years down the line. And if you can be that clear at the beginning, it really helps to inform the kind of technology that you look at and consider, and the questions you then ask those technology suppliers as to whether or not the stuff that you want to do is on the roadmap, never going to get on the roadmap, or already delivered and in use when they're going forward. So it is definitely about a long-term vision of the customer journey, and also what are the pain points you're currently living with that you want to get past with a change of system.
That actually answered my second question already as to how important the vision is. And I certainly find when we start projects like that sometimes people just know they want to change, but they're not quite clear why. So I think working on the vision or the pain point is an absolute important starting point, because if you don't know where you want to go, you will end up where you just never ever wanted to be, I guess. No, but with the cloud PMS, you need to look at so many different components. We saw on Sophie's slide earlier that we have 2 very different scenarios. One is all-in-one, and one is a combination of lots of functionality. So you do need to look at payment platforms, at POS integrations, at email confirmation software, and so on, when it's not all-inclusive. And with such an abundance of software out there, how did you go about making those decisions? And also, which system, I mean, we'll get to that later, which systems you actually decided on. So from the myriad of systems, how did you go about the decision-making process?
Sure. So you're right, there are lots of different facets that form part of that customer journey with a PMS, from check-in to arrival to upselling to to departure, to all of the stuff that goes on behind the house with EPOS systems, website, booking engines, and distribution. And I think what was a really useful piece of work to do was to effectively take all of those different components and, as a business, put them into some kind of logical order, so that you knew the ones that were an absolute must and the ones that might not be quite where they needed to be, but you could live with them not being fully functional at the point that you deployed them. And then the luxury of the open architecture PMS approach is that you can then go and look at what is best in class in each of those areas and identify component parts that are the best providers in those areas. And if I take upselling as an example, if you have a legacy system, you might have to take their legacy upselling tool that comes with the big box solution. In an open architecture environment, there may be 10 upselling tools that you can plug into your PMS. And actually, when you're playing 10 partners off against each other and looking at their functionality, you very quickly can see what would suit your business better than another person's piece. And whether it's right for your customers. And that gives you a choice, but also having that list really helps you to focus on what is the right fit for your customer, rather than take what is available, as which is what you sometimes find in the legacy world.
And can I ask you which systems you actually went for and why? I mean, this is by no means advice for anyone, because as you've heard, you have to go through the process yourself and assess, but it would still be good to hear what kind of architecture you went for and why, and also if there was a difference between your own property and the hotel group.
Okay, so at the client I was working with, we looked at a real mix of PMSs. So they were very clear that what they wanted to achieve was to have a PMS that didn't dictate the architecture of their tech stack for the next 10 years. And that actually what they wanted was a tech stack that if the PMS didn't work in 5 years' time, they could swap it out for something else. But around that, they would build other pieces of technology that help with the customer journey. In the client's perspective, they opted for a product called Muse, which is an open architecture PMS that has a very kind of, I liken it to Apple, so it's like an app store. And quite a few of the PMSs that are up and coming in this cloud environment have this approach where you can then pick and choose which partners you connect with, and it's a very easy process to connect through the APIs to those partners through the marketplace. So Muse became the center, and they treated it very much like a cash register. That was all it was going to be doing. It was going to take the money, and it had a very good selection of payment providers that partnered with it, and they were best in class. And I think that's a really valid point with technology. If your technology that you're trying to sell to a customer has partnered with other technology that doesn't reflect the same level of skill that your technology had, that's an indicator something's not always quite right. So if you're partnering with the best in class of payment providers and you're partnering with the best in class of revenue management tools, then that demonstrates that A, your system and your software is good because those partners want to work with you, but B, that actually you're passing that benefit onto the customer that you're selling your PMS to, because they can have access to what they think is best in class. So we ended up with as a test model, we ended up with a site that had Muse as a PMS. We had Duetto as an RMS provider. We had Power BI, Microsoft as a BI tool. We had Stripe as a payment vehicle, and then that all backed into financial systems around Sage and some of the bigger players from that, and a separate CRM system that they then integrated about 6 months afterwards. But out of that model, we've only really made 1 or 2 slight changes as it's then rolled out and scaled across the rest of their business, because a number of those were great from the word go.
Okay, that's interesting. I would love to pick up on payment options a little bit later, but I think we'll do that in the Q&A, because I think being pan-European, we sometimes then have kind of European providers that only are payment options, like in Switzerland, and so on, that only apply in that country, and that are sometimes a little bit difficult to work with then. But in terms of functionality, did you have to compromise on anything versus legacy systems?
Was
there any department that raised their head and saying, this doesn't...
Yeah. So,
it's a bit more cumbersome now.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the observations of the new breed of PMS is that they are quite limited in the way that they can manage big groups, meetings, and event spaces, and that was definitely one of the challenges and one of the trade-offs that we made, is that whilst we got benefit from lots of other areas, the ability to manage some of the meetings and events sizes that might come in the future would be a trade-off. But conversely, this client was manually processing payments for prepaid bookings overnight with a labor cost that was substantial, and the ability to automate the payment at the time of booking through an integrated payment provider saved enormously on both labor and efficiencies through the front desk and the teams on property, which enabled them to get the operating model to be slicker, which was worth more than the trade-off of not having a great meeting and event solution at that point.
Okay. Cool, thank you very much. And then over to Charlie, talking about legacy systems. Now at Impala, you started out as a PMS, and then actually realized it's a biggie and lots of integrations are required, and you pivoted to be the API provider. So why is it so challenging to connect new up and coming software with legacy PMS?
So I think primarily the thing to consider around legacy PMSs, and I think everyone in the room here probably knows it, who we're talking about, is that if you think back to actually how they started out as that ERP solution, where the primary function was that you buy all in one and you buy everything that comes within that package, and you don't need to actually connect anything in. If you consider that as the starting point, then that sets the precedent for everything else over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years. Everything from technically, if you were to go and want to build integration into Opera, Protel, in like any of those kind of systems, technically, if you were a developer and you were trying to build a guest management, a new best in class, best in breed guest messaging tool, for example, the actual, like, technically for you to go and do that, the documentation, everything to that isn't built primarily for that to be easy for you, because in the first instance they built the system, they built the company based on the fact that it's all in one, and hotels buy that suite of solutions. So every way you look at it, whether it's technically, whether it's commercially, whether it's from a tactical perspective, tactically, like it's difficult to change an entire organization where it's primarily been seen as like, right, we're going to sell all one solutions, through to actually, you know what, we're going to offer our core PMS and then give people the flexibility and the ability to pick and choose things around that. Changing an entire organization across all these different facets over the course period of time is incredibly tough. And I say that that's like the main reason why there isn't like one pinpoint thing why it's actually difficult. It's an entire organization that was built on that approach, and so changing that is going to take time. And I think like those organizations, that they are making efforts to move that, and Oracle are opening up the API so you can build into them. They are reducing the fees it takes, and the fees that are charged both to sort of technology providers and to hoteliers, in terms of like what that costs from a integration perspective. But that takes time. So there are lots of things going on. Those legacy providers are moving towards that more sort of open environment, but it's going to take time. And in the meanwhile, you do have providers like Muse and others that are coming out with that open first approach that makes it a lot easier to build into and to buy into.
Okay, and then with that guest centricity and seamless customer journey as the key driver, and this is really a question to both of you, Charlie and Jim, can the ideal functionality ever be achieved? Because something that I quite often come across is that the hotel owner says, oh, we want to, I mean, the hotel owner is always very reticent to actually change the PMS, but they say our PMS is coming to end of life, we want to change PMS. But then when you really ask the right question, what it often turns out to be, we want to be better at CRM. So with that focus on guest centricity, can you actually achieve that ideal functionality with a legacy system?
With the legacy system, and I'll jump in before you, Jim, before you can go into sort of the experience you've had. But I think with the legacy system, I think the answer is no at the moment. I think it's pretty clear that and actually, if I'm being honest, even with Open API PMS at the moment, that's still the case. Like there are still features and functions that when I was talking to hoteliers that they're looking for that simply aren't possible at the moment, because of how still disconnected the industry is. And I think, so in terms of like an ideal, I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of way for the industry as a whole to go to get to that point. Legacy, I think, yes, is going to be like further off on that stance. In terms of like ideal, I think it completely depends on, from a hotelier to hotelier and from a hotel to hotel perspective. That ideal scenario is going to be really different from a 250, 500 key chain down to a like 10-bed hotel that is looking for a completely different ideal scenario with their guest journey.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Charlie. I think any software company, whether they are selling multiple products within their suite or a single product that connects to another product, ultimately they have to balance that level of investment that they put into those things. And in legacy systems, it is always the challenge is that they can't invest always in every product line. So therefore something suffers when they develop in the core ones. And that is often where in legacy systems, you find that one part of it doesn't move as quickly as another part. And that then causes the pain that you hear from the hotelier saying, we want to change our PMS because this bell and whistle over here is nowhere near as good as the one I've seen in my friend's place down the road. And so the open architecture approach absolutely supports that. But it is very true. You know, one hotel at 400 bedrooms might want a completely seamless check-in process and they have no operating staff on property, and that can be achieved, but that's a very different requirement than a customer-centric property that wants to meet and greet and take people around and show them virtual tours. So it is very, very different in each property.
Okay. And then with the trends coming and going so quickly and ever-changing software, you know, ever new functionality, what is the best way to make sure that whatever you pick at this point in time is future-proof?
Jim, I'll let you.
Okay.
You know, that you don't have buyer's regret 6 months down the line, you see something nice and shiny that you really want, but now you've just made your investment and shop is closed.
Yeah, I think we're in a very lucky position as hoteliers now. Years ago, there was a large capital investment cost to put a PMS or any technology in that included servers, kit. That just doesn't exist anymore. So the outlay to change your technology is a lot lower than it would have been in 2010. And I think we are used to I suppose an environment where it's okay not to commit for too long to something. So most of these guys in the technology space that work with open architecture don't require you to sign contracts for huge lengths of times. The cost to run that as an operating cost is not great every month. So if it goes wrong after 6 months, it's not the end of the world to disconnect it and try something else. With my client, we had this experience with upselling tools. We ran 3 separate upselling tools, all attached to Muse in 3 different locations, and then evaluated them, put them on a trial for 6 months, and then pick the one we like. And so you have this. That would never have happened in the kind of Oracle days in the early 2000s. You just wouldn't have had that choice. So I think we're in a really good position to be able to pick and choose and test before we commit to something now.
Couldn't agree more. I think the way that I look at this is, if you think about any other kind of industry or personally, if you're within any kind of business, you have the ability to to test products on an ongoing basis, and whether that's on a week or a month, 6 months, 12 months, not tying yourself into a product that's fully rolled out across your entire group, is something that you should absolutely utilize. Be able to go and think about, okay, some new type of technology, whether that's guest engagement, whether that's operationally, whether that's within human resources, whatever that may be, the different ecosystems within the hotel, test it out, and push back against the technology providers that they're selling to you. They will 100% want to sell into you for the whole group from day one. You can 100% push back against that and say, I want to run tests for a month or so. And it doesn't have to be across the whole group, it doesn't have to be across the whole full hotel. Test it out, test out yourself, and then align that with that vision that Jim was talking about earlier. I feel like if you align it with your vision and able to test it, then you're in a pretty good position to make sure that you're not going to regret your decisions further down the line.
And I think that's just such an important part of it. Now, during your both selection and implementation, Jim, did anything unusual crop up at all that you didn't expect, be it either a major benefit, like you mentioned earlier, a bit of time saving on the payment processing, or just anything that you just didn't expect at all, positive or negative?
There were lots of little wins, certainly, but I think the biggest challenge we faced was, as a business, that when you try and hold on to legacy processes, when you change your systems, and what you're then asking your new solution to do is so bespoke and unique to what you've done for years that you just find it comes against a brick wall, because that PMS may never want to move into that space. So I think one of the biggest hurdles we had to overcome with the client was to question the kind of ingrained processes, challenge them, and make sure that they were flexible enough to be modified in such a way they could fit in with the new piece of technology. I suppose the biggest surprise from a win perspective was the speed of deployment. We were deploying, the first property was kind of 6 to 8 weeks of deployment, and we're now deploying 4 properties a week, and it takes us around 2 to 3 weeks to do that for those 4 properties. So that has been a massive eye-opener. I grew up in the Stackis Hilton world, where it would take months and a team would arrive on site and stay with you for 3 weeks, and that just doesn't happen anymore. It's low touch, it's all done remotely. There's lots of importing of data and time saving done by the providers, and it means it's nowhere near as scary as it was in the 1990s and the 2000s.
That's good to know, and actually answers one of my upcoming questions already, because that is really one of the big disruptions during any new implementation. So I assume the disruption is not as bad nowadays, but you would still have to plan for it in terms of training, which I assume is much more intuitive and quicker. Yeah, so
nothing. When we first started the process with this client, it was pre-COVID, and we had a small team that would come on site for the transition for a day or two to do some training with the teams. And actually what COVID has created is a completely digital, remote deployment model. And so all of the training is done remotely in their own time. So each of the members of the team go through modules online. It's all e-learning. They then do online training and questions and troubleshooting. And actually, when you get to the deployment day, everything is done remotely with no one on site. And so that just massively speeds up the process, and it doesn't impact the business as much because they fit it around the time that they're working, and then they do an hour of training after a session on the front desk, for example. But it has massively sped it up, and it's just made it more efficient. I'm sure that's different for much more complex businesses, but certainly, we're deploying anything from 20 beds to 400 beds, and in that branding, it's much more efficient than it's ever been before, I think.
Cool. And because we went to deployment now, I just want to take one step back to the RFP process. So how has that changed over the years? You mentioned kind of Stackis Hilton earlier. I've been involved in a few change management programs for them as well. And typically in the olden days, we would end up with a catalog of around 400 questions followed by a scorecard and so on. So what does that look like now? Should a hotel owner go out with that catalog of questions, or what should they go about it?
I don't think there's one size fits all for this, but my observations of doing PMS selection processes over the last 4 to 5 years has been that there is far more emphasis now on the relationship with that supplier and that provider, and whether you feel that you are a small fish in a big pond and you've got no influence, or whether you are a big fish in a developing pond or a growing pond where you can help to steer that software development towards what you may want. And I think that relationship is far more important than the 400 questions. I think there's still space for a scorecard, and I think there's still space for specific things to benchmark suppliers apart. But the relationship with the supplier, the access to product development roadmaps, the ability to influence development, and ultimately the ability to go out and see it in play in a hotel and have a hotelier tell you here, and that's very different from 10 years ago. Some of these PMS providers will absolutely let you go and talk to a supplier and to one of their clients, and the client will tell you warts and all, because they have that level of confidence that the warts are not so big to stop you buying it. They'll just be little niggles. And that's a very different environment to do an RFP process in than it was.
And I guess especially the availability of references is one of the key drivers. If you can see somebody who's similar to your own property has done that, then you know you can achieve it as well. And now that your implementation is complete, can you tell us a bit more about the benefits that you're reaping from your new tech stack?
So as an independent hotel, I am benefiting hugely from average rate growth, but you know, just the ability to flex pricing. I had an incumbent PMS before that just had a lot of limitations around promo codes, discounts, derived rates, those types of things. I couldn't afford to have a revenue management system, and I figured that after 20 years in revenue management, I might be able to do that myself. But just found that the functionality wasn't there to be able to do what I wanted. So for me, that has been hugely valuable, and you know, put £7-8 a year on the average rate as we've gone up, and we're now in the brackets of where I didn't think we'd get to. So that's been really valuable. And just to have the flexibility with payments, I think that has been hugely cost effective for us. So we had those legacy PDQs on the front desk where we were renting them, we were paying for multiple things on top of that, in terms of fraud prevention, you know, just lots of costs. And actually, when you've got an online integrated payment vehicle, a lot of that vanishes, and you pay a fixed fee so that you can budget against a transaction fee. And that was a great economy of scale for us as an independent hotel. So and just being able to suddenly access things like upselling tools and integrate it to your little accounting package that you didn't think could integrate to anything, and suddenly it does. It's just been hugely cost saving for us, because it's just reduced a lot of workload.
Okay, that's good to know. And can anyone work with a cloud system? What if you're in a very remote location and your internet may not be 100% reliable? What happens? And this question to both of you, really, what happens when the internet is down? Or when it's not reliable? I mean, do you always need the biggest bandwidth in order to operate?
No. I mean, it's like anything. I can remember days when Opera would go down for days, and you had to go and get the backup tape out of the safe, and that was what you did. I think technology is always at the mercy of the internet, and whether there's broadband or fiber. But no, it's not a huge issue. Location-wise, it doesn't matter. If you haven't got a particularly strong, it's not a heavy cloud-based system to run PMSs. They're not heavy on the internet. Generally, so I don't think that's a limitation. I think the only limitations I see at the moment perhaps are just around some of the functionality as a big conference venue that you might want. It doesn't always have that, and also from a group perspective, it doesn't have the kind of CRS capability that you would perhaps find in an Oracle or an Amadeus of this world that are built for big chains, and those two things are where they're moving towards, but they're not quite there yet.
I think from my side, regarding internet, like Jim said, like they're not massively dependent. Like they will cache data so that you can still use them if the internet is down. I would more argue that if we're talking about being guest centric these days, like the guest demand internet, and that's probably the best place to start. And for that to always be up. That wider question around, I guess, like new age PMS being dependable, completely agree. Like it's fully down to what you're looking for, what the state of the hotel, what you're looking to implement, whether that's 500 keys per hotel group that needs all the bells and whistles, then you're looking at, I would argue that Oracle, etc., is probably still your best bet. If you're looking at a 20 key hotel that you're looking to all the bells and whistles from a guest messaging perspective and being guest centric, then you're looking at a completely different sort of setup and something which would probably be best based on open architecture. So in terms of dependable, depends on what you're looking for and what the vision of you have for the implementation.
Okay, thank you very much. So then, last but not least, are there any kind of final pearls of wisdom that you can share with us? Pitfalls
well,
to avoid, things to look out for.
Yeah, I think Charlie said something quite important earlier. So tech companies are excellent at selling tech to you for everything you possibly want. And I think the biggest piece of advice is to really kick the tires on some of the functionality that they claim, and especially with APIs and things that connect to your system. One technology provider might say they've got a fully integrated API. That's not necessarily fully integrated both ways. So it might push or pull data, but it won't do both. So those little pitfalls can sometimes mean that you're led a little bit down a garden path, and then you find out it doesn't do quite what you needed it to do. So always question. You don't have to be a IT whiz to ask the questions, but it's always useful to, this is when going to see somebody else who's got that technology and saying, what are the pitfalls of it? Because then you know what questions to ask the supplier when they're sat in front of you.
Thank you very much. And Charlie?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think don't be forced into a decision. Try it out. Literally try it out. Whether that's you trying it out, whether that's whoever the relevant person in the hotel and in the organization is, sort of being able to sort of test it out. That's going to be the best way if you know the sort of functionality actually holds up over a period of time. If it's that two-way integration does exist, or if it's something slightly more manual, whatever you're trying to achieve with that. Don't be forced on that full-on decision, because yes, tech companies, they are built on a sales engine that is very good at selling products into organizations. So I think that, and also just being extremely clear on what you're looking for, what requirements you have towards that sort of longer term vision. I think like a mixture of those two things will put you in pretty good stead to not fall into any pitfalls and be pretty well equipped for the short, medium, and longer term.
So thank you very much. I'm sure that we will have some questions in the audience. Now I'll hand back to Carl. Well,
Jutta, there's a couple of very to the point questions, which I thought we'd ask while the whole audience is together, from two different angles. One is the private individual, smaller hotel group, and if you like, and the other one is from the wider brand point of view. So Stephanie's asked us the question, which Jim and Charlie have sort of answered, but I'd sort of ask it in this context. And her question in the chat is, how technical has the process become? Do we need to be an IT specialist rather than a hotelier to choose a new PMS or environment?
So, I'll, if you don't mind, Charlie, I'll answer. So I have a receptionist that's been with me for 5 years. And when I joined and took over the hotel, she was working in a diary and writing the reservations in a diary. And she is my absolute yardstick when it comes to PMS. If she can use it, then it's really easy to use. And she loves, the PMS we put in. And it's because it works like Google. It has a search bar, you type in what you want and it brings back the results. You do not have to be technical to make this stuff work anymore. And yes, there are some slightly more technical things that happen when you're connecting partners, but actually these software providers and technology companies have made it so much easier than it was 10 years ago. So definitely nothing is unachievable. And if you can't find how to do something, there's always a tutorial within the software that enables you to do it anyway.
I think that Stephanie's question was more about going through the selection process. How do you manage it from a non-technical point of view? If I want to choose a PMS, I think to some extent you've answered it by the vision angle, but how technical is that process there of getting your vision right?
So I suppose, in the process of selecting, you do have to have an element of an IT understanding as to where some of those pinch points might be. But it very much depends on the size and the complexity of the hotel that you're considering for it. So I would think, yes, if you're a big hotel or a chain of 6 or 7 properties, then absolutely the involvement of some IT understanding is going to only add value to that process. In a small independent, probably less so. But I think that skills that the tech companies do now is they can very easily speak to whichever level of person that they're dealing with. So it's not like a dark art anymore that it used to be. They can speak to anybody about the technology and it makes sense as a user.
Okay, I think that answers
well, as a consultant, obviously speaking for all of us consultants on here, that's really what we do. It's not necessarily super technical, but it's really holding hand in identifying those pain points and also making sure that all of the different departments are heard, because you quite often then hear about kind of gaps in processes that you also want to fill in terms of communication, not only with the customer, but also communication within, you know, be it front office to housekeeping, be it front office to F&B, and so on. But overall, I find the systems are very, very easy to understand and much more intuitive, which is also why the implementation process and training is so much shorter now.
I think the other question which I thought we'd ask in the wider environment from Paul Nisbet is, he's now talking bigger brands or a group where you've got multiple different, and we had this discussion about 6 weeks ago about multi-brand operations, of which there are more and more today. And he's saying one of the big frustrations with brand PMSs is looking at efficiencies in labor to things like self-check-in kiosks. And how does this form part of the thought making or decision making process?
Yeah, I can see the challenge. I think so with the client I'm working with, we are running the same system across 3 different brands at the same time. But they've had to be really clear about the digital journey across those 3 brands being the same, and ensuring that the software and the technology they deploy it doesn't change the customer experience, even though the PMS might have a different logo within it, which is into the brand they're coming into. But I think you really do, it does run into challenges when you get into the big branded hotels that are quite clear about which PMSs you can use and which you can't. And then it becomes a very difficult one in terms of fitting kind of cloud-based PMSs that are not necessarily in big brands into those brands. And it's an area that's being developed into, I think, at the moment, but we're not there yet. There is a gap